Jeremiah, obviously, your background is soccer. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself, as a player, as a coach, as a mentor, and kind of your philosophy of training and the reason we're here today?
All right, so I'm a current soccer coach for a semi-professional team and for a youth club that I have called WSB Elite Soccer Club. I work with adults, young adults, players. At the Atlantic City team, we work with players up to age 30 and down to, I would say, our youngest player was 18 or 19. And then I've coached youth players between the ages of 14 and 18.
Okay. So your whole life, more or less, you've been on the soccer field.
Yeah, so I was a professional player for 8 years. I played in Serbia, Greece, France, Denmark, Poland, Saudi Arabia. Played in MLS and for the U.S. national team. Was All-American ACC Player of the Year at Wake Forest. So, and then I played locally at the Haverford School and was All-American a couple of times. So, my soccer development took place here. And everything that I did took place in the States from a developmental standpoint, and then I went abroad and had some success.
So you've been a player. You were a player for, let's say, 25, 30 years.
Sure.
What led you into coaching? Was it like a seamless transition that you were like, all right, well, now that I'm done playing, I'm going to coach, or was there more behind it?
Yeah, I resisted it because I wanted to get away from the game after playing a little bit. So the business side of the experience was a little bit fatiguing, let's say that.
Okay.
My wife actually saw me moping around the house, and she said, get out there and go get on the field. So I started with just some small group training, and then I actually I partnered with another company, and we had a training company. And through that training company, what I realized was, there were a lot of kids that just weren't getting some of the technical developmental curriculum and practice that they needed. So we were overwhelmed with the amount of kids that came in, and then that led to the next step, which was coaching at a club. I coached a club team, and the first year we went to the National Final Four. The next year I had 7 players get injured. And I'm like, okay, what changed? Well, they went from junior high school to high school. They were 9th graders in a high school team, and the demands of the high school program affected their bodies negatively, right? So I had players with lower back injuries, with groin injuries, and one had a stress fracture. So I said, okay, I'm going to go coach high school so I can get a better handle on what's going on in that environment. So I coached high school at my dad's alma mater, and what I saw was the structure of practice and preseason and the game schedule. It's impossible to have any type of proper recovery. So there's just no concept of periodization and how to manage rest to recovery and balancing the different developmental tracks each kid is on. So a 9th grader doesn't have the same body as a 12th grader. So I did that for 2 years, came back out, went back to my club team, realized that I needed to create a different type of environment where we could develop players in a healthy way, taking their individual developmental their status into consideration. And also I knew I needed to connect with people that knew a lot more than I did about the subject of injury prevention, and sort of build a group to kind of attack the issue. So that's why we're here.
I mean, that pretty much answered my next question. So basically you saw a drastic change in training between the 13 or 12 to 14-year-olds and then 15 to 18-year-olds?
Well, what I saw was there was no thought put into it. So imagine this, I come from a professional environment where there's constant innovation. So every new product that came out, we're the first ones to get access to it. You go down to the youth level and there aren't funds to even have a physical trainer at games. So there's no innovation going on, and there were clubs that were incentivized not to change because they were benefiting from a particular business model, right? So they didn't need to change. So, you know, my attitude, my approach is, I think you can do better, and you don't have to always charge a lot more. It doesn't have to cost more to do a better job. It just requires good people who have the knowledge or expertise actually thinking about ways to make an environment better for kids to train. So that's...
Well, so, and you know, you're mentioning your different levels have different, you know, whether it be budgets or philosophies, and some people think that a 12-year-old doesn't need this, or you don't have to have a physical trainer there, and it's kind of a good segue getting in to talk about Jimmy. Jimmy, if you don't mind, introducing yourself and explaining what you do, and then have a couple of questions, just about your experience over the years and things that have changed and things like that.
Sure. I've been with the Flyers now for my second stint. It's going on 25 years, and I am a certified athletic trainer, strength coach, and my background, I started actually in physical therapy way back when with a gentleman by the name of Tursi, and he was the first physical therapist, athletic trainer for Philadelphia Flyers. And my job at the Flyers is to really oversee the entire organization and our players. It doesn't matter if they're playing for the Flyers or Phantoms or East Coast or down in Europe or wherever, to oversee it and make sure that they stay healthy. And what I've been seeing over the years, I mean, things have changed. I mean, obviously when I broke into the profession in the early 80s compared to where it now is in 2018, things have changed and changed for the good. However, what we're seeing now, let's say they've changed for the good in terms of how we're identifying injuries. And we're identifying injuries much better long before the season ever starts by doing what we call functional assessments. And the functional assessments have taken a real look at the human body from the inside out. And we do this with a surface electrode and have our athletes go through numerous movement patterns, and we're trying to pick up faults in that movement pattern, what we call compensatory pattern. And by doing so, we combine it with X-rays that we take of the pelvis, because we believe, not just in hockey, but in soccer, football, all your sports, everything is generated through the lumbopelvic hip complex. And if there's a fault in that, there's going to be a fault through that whole pavement chain. And what Jeremiah and I discussed, we called it the discovery phase. And I do believe it's a discovery phase, because it doesn't matter if you're playing professional hockey, professional soccer, whatever it is, you, the athlete, have to know what's going on inside that body to help correct it, to help make you a better athlete. But just not a better athlete, but a healthier athlete, because there's nobody that I know of who plays sports, professional all the way down to Sandlot, who wants to miss a game. Athletes want to play. They like thoroughbreds. They want to run. They want to play. They want to be in the game. But what breaks them down, right? It could be faulty training programs, which we're seeing now, is that one size doesn't fit all. I see it now when I go outside our training facility and I look around and I see the youth of today, and they're all training the same way. And is that right? No, because the good Lord made us different. Everybody's different. We're not all created equal when it comes to size and strength. And we have to make sure we pick up those little compensatory movement patterns and hopefully make you a better athlete, better, healthier athlete.
So how would you, in terms of the progression of these different programs, like you had just said, you could walk out today and you're still seeing an entire team doing the exact same thing. At what level, in terms of the player, whether it be NCAA, high school, where do you think the switch has been in the past, where people start becoming a little more conscientious of their bodies, and where do you think it needs to be?
That's a really good question. I believe it all starts at a very early age. And because our bodies start to mature, and it's at different rates, male and female, different rates. But you know, you look at the age of 12, I think the kids are starting to get it. And you know, they're being thrown into programs maybe they shouldn't be thrown into. And you know, these conditioning programs, and again, we don't like the word conditioning, but we think it should be a performance when you go out into your performance program, because that's really what it's about. A performance program, and I'll use the word conditioning, but I'm going to keep on alluding to performance, is that these children should be in a program to meet their individual needs. Now, granted, there's going to be some overlap. There's no doubt about it. But again, we're talking about creating healthier athletes, creating a better athlete. And you know, by doing so, one size doesn't fit all. And so I believe at the age of 12, because we get them, and I'm saying we, the Philadelphia Flyers, we get our athletes sometimes at the age of 17, but most times at the age of 18. So by then, a lot of damage has been done because of year after year beating up, right? And in terms of programs, their performance programs or conditioning programs. And also from playing one sport. You know, I see it today, the kids, 364 days a year, they're playing the same sport. And when I was growing up, and I think most of us were growing up, is that you played multiple sports. And that's not saying that if you want to be a soccer player, I want you to be the best soccer player in the world. However, let's not beat up your body 364 days, because we know orthopedically it's starting to break down. We're starting to see injuries at the early ages of 12, 13, 14, where we saw them at the early 20s to mid-20s. We're seeing the injuries that we saw in the 30s now in our late teens, early 20s. So things are breaking down.
And is that over usage, essentially? You know, if you have a 12-year-old who's just playing soccer, and a soccer player runs, 6-7 miles per match, you know, if you have a 12-year-old doing that over and over and over, is that what's causing that? Or is it the fact that they're only doing that and not doing these other sports to kind of offset?
I'm going to allude to what Lee Iacocca said many years ago when he was running Chrysler. I'm going to stick to the knitting because I know hockey the best.
Okay.
And I'll answer it this way, is that we're currently taking a look at our goaltenders. And just like baseball took a look at pitchers and had a pitch count, we're taking a look at our goaltenders and seeing at what point does the save, now most goaltenders, all goaltenders anymore go down to that butterfly stance and come right back up again, down and up and down, making their saves, right? At what point does their hip become aggravated? And at what point should we put a save count on during practice, right? So that's telling me it's overuse. That's telling the orthopedic doctors who are doing the study with me that there's an overuse going on. So, I mean, what we're looking for with soccer, with many sports, is at what point, you know, at what point does the athlete begin to break down, and let's back them off before that happens. Let's take care of trouble before trouble begins, right? And let's take care of it. And that's what we're looking for, and that's what these functional assessments are going to help us do. Because we're not going to do it just once a year, we'll do it twice a year for the athlete. And then we'll, you know, by the information we get on that, we'll be able to put them on a solid performance program that they can help better themselves.
Okay, so essentially for any of our listeners who are as simple-minded as me, what these functional assessments are is it would more or less show the athlete how their body is working and pinpoint, or at least give more complete, distinctive information as to what areas they need to improve?
Correct.
Okay.
What it's going to give the athlete, but it's going to give the healthcare professional, the physical therapist, the athletic trainer, now
and the parents and
parents,
everyone
the coaches,
involved.
everybody.
Okay.
What it does is eliminate the gray areas, right? We're keeping things in black and white.
So that
It's
takes
simple.
it allows people to no longer have their opinions. You know, where a parent thinks this is what's best for their son or daughter, and the coach thinks this, and the athlete thinks this, takes all of that out of the way, and it's, no guys, here it is.
Takes it all out of
This
play.
is it.
Yeah.
There are the numbers, here are the stats, and here's how we can fix it.
Right. Yeah, I agree with what you said 100%. It eliminates the gray areas, it keeps it in black and white, and it gives us the best knowledge on how to create that athlete or better that athlete.
Okay, and that actually is a decent segue into talking with Dr. Tursi here. So with the functional screening, with the x-rays, basically anytime you try to convince a parent that they should do something medically for their child, they're going to question it. You know, they'll say, well, I don't know about that, I don't know about this, and particularly when we're talking about the hips and the x-rays, something that constantly comes up is a parent not wanting to expose their son or daughter to radiation. Is there a lot of truth behind that fear? Is it more of a, you know, is that something that is worthy of being fearful of, or is it kind of, you know, not as true as people tend to believe?
Sure, I think that stems from the past, where the actual, you know.
Yeah, no, you can pull it right up. The other one.
Oh, okay,
Yeah,
the wrong one.
There you go.
There we go.
Am I going to start again?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that stems from the past, where radiation techniques were not really as refined as they are today. So people were getting exposed to a fair amount of radiation. Today's programs and protocols that are being used expose a patient or a person to minimal radiation. Most of these kids are going to end up getting more radiation from their cell phone or being near a microwave. There's a tremendous amount of radiation that comes off of those units and devices, yet with radiation incurred by x-rays, it's not something we have to worry about as much anymore.
Okay, so that could be more of, you know, when the parents' generation was growing up, the technology and the radiation that was associated with that was a lot greater than what we're seeing today.
Yes, it's much more focused now.
Okay.
It's much more limited in exposure. Again, you don't want to get more radiation or more x-rays than you need to.
Right.
But to have a simple radiograph for a hip, or to have even a series of radiographs for a hip and knee and ankle, you're really being exposed minimally to radiation.
Okay. Most of that, I mean, I feel like that right there, that takes the fear away of a lot of parents.
Sure.
Now, tell us a little bit more about, you know, your specialty, you know, the role that you play in, you know, whether it's an athlete's progression or recovery, or performance in general.
Sure. Well, we really do play a large role in all of those kind of places. The initial preventative type care, the assessment or discovery, and then also the treatment end. As you probably realize, the foot is the foundation of the human body. So in all the sports we're talking about, they're weight-bearing sports, whether it be ice hockey, as Jim was talking about, or soccer, as Jeremiah was alluding to, and you had mentioned football. Evaluating a patient's gait, looking at the way they stand, looking at the way they function during the gait or movement pattern, can usually provide significant insight as to whether they're going to be at risk for injury development. An overpronator, where the foot itself should be sort of parallel with the ground, in certain cases that will flatten out along the arch, and in doing that, that places significant strain along the plantar fascial ligament. It actually affects the Achilles tendon. Sometimes the Achilles tendon, being short, will precipitate that pronatory movement, and it predisposes athletes, the younger athletes, to Sever's disease, which is where their heel is growing, and in the growth cartilage with pronation, that cartilage gets irritated, usually between the ages of 9 and 11, and it creates significant heel pain. So that's something to look for. Long term, it can develop heel spurs, bunions, hammer toes, PT tendon dysfunction, which is the collapse of the arch. So it really becomes important that we assess them properly, usually through first clinically looking at them, second by using an x-ray, a weight-bearing x-ray. A lot of times my patients come in with their families and they say, went to urgent care, I got an injury and they gave me this x-ray and it's non-weight bearing. Well, that's good to assess whether there's an injury present or not, but it doesn't help us biomechanically to assess the alignments. And then there's the Tursi study that Jimmy offers, and that's kind of an injury preventative measure of testing to assess that patient's aloneness to injury.
Now, talking about patients coming in, and you know, we've discussed how it needs to start happening at a younger age. Do you see a lot of, you know, what is your age group or demographic that you see the most of, and do you think that the younger group, it's imperative that they need to come in before it gets to the point where you're looking at all of these different potential injuries that could happen?
Absolutely, Robert. You know, I treat in our practice mostly pediatric through middle age. Our practice is relatively large. We have 8 doctors and multiple locations in New Jersey and in Philadelphia. In working with athletes and such, I have some docs that focus on the senior citizens, some that focus specifically on the pediatric patients, and then wound care, diabetics and such. But my practice is pretty much focused on the pediatric patient, pediatric athlete, through the adult athlete, whether it be weekend athlete, collegiate, high school, or professional.
And as far as the, I mean, I feel like I can answer this question, but as far as the benefits of coming in ahead of time, you know, and you know, when we're talking in general here with this proposed program, can you dive into a little more about the benefits of getting ahead of this, as opposed, I know you alluded to the different injuries that could come up down the line, but kind of talk a little bit more about, you know, getting ahead of the game rather than being reactive.
Sure. Seeing the patient preventatively obviously makes the most sense, because as you mentioned, when these patients come in with injuries, then we're needing to take them out of the sport and then recover them and treat them and then allow them to rehabilitate after. If we can evaluate and assess them at an early age with their athletic activities, watch the way that they walk, see the way they stand, assess their limbs for limb length difference. That's another thing that's very, very common that we see. There's been multiple athletes that Jim and I worked on together that have come in with hip pain, and maybe even went through 2 or 3 hip surgeries and weren't getting better. And then we come to find out in our evaluation, sort of a last-ditch effort, let's send them to the foot and ankle guy and Jimmy, and we work together and we look and we evaluate and say, wow, that one limb is shorter than the other, so they're overloading that limb. And by putting a lift or incorporating a lift into their orthotic, which is a device that fits in the shoe, it allows them a more even weight bearing across the hip.
And it's as simple as just adding a little something to their shoe or their skate?
Yes. There's a certain amount you can add into the skate or the shoe, and then beyond which, if it's a larger difference between one limb to the other, you actually have to incorporate it into the sole of the shoe or the skate. You can put it on the platform of the skate.
And now, is that something that, you know, you would be able to identify if a 12-year-old walked into your office to do a preventative screening of sorts? You would be able to see that. So instead of, you know, trying to play or skate on that leg and getting to the point where you need a hip surgery, or, you know, you're exhausting all these resources to figure out what's wrong, that potential problem could be fixed as a 12-year-old with an insert.
As simple as that. When we see the patient walk into the office, first thing I look for is the balance and symmetry of their kind of alignment. Are their shoulders at the same height? Sometimes if you see one shoulder's dipped down, or you see their back has a bit of a scoliosis, a curvature of the spine, that could be compensation for a limb difference. And then we can measure it, and we measure it from a place in the hip called the ASIS, and we get down to the medial malleolus, which is down at the ankle, and then we kind of compare the two. But I always say a more accurate study is called a scanogram, where we take an x-ray from the belly button to the floor, and then on that skeleton that comes up with the x-ray image, it's incredibly accurate because they have a ruler that's in between the legs when they take that picture. and you could see one limb is shorter than the other by a centimeter, and then accommodate it with a lift, or more commonly incorporate a lift into the orthotic, so the athlete doesn't even really know that they have it in there. It just balances them out, makes them less likely to have overloading of one side, knee, hip, low back, and sometimes even neck and shoulder.
And this is something that is accessible to athletes of all ages.
Accessible but rarely done, which is unfortunate.
So that was a perfect segue into the next thing. So basically, and Jimmy or Jeremiah, if you guys want to answer this one, all things considered here, knowing what we know as far as athletes getting injured earlier on, training regimens being different for different sports, different age groups, let's summarize this program that we've been discussing as far as what we would like to see change in sports performance in general, and the age it should be taking place, the different aspects of it with the Tursi V, with your screenings. So what can be done here?
You want to start?
Sure. We can cut that out.
Okay. I believe a paradigm shift has to occur, and it is going to occur. I believe that as you see here, we are all working together as a team, and it's a team to help support the team. So it's orthopedic doctors, it's foot and ankle specialists, it's physical therapists, athletic trainers, coaches, moms and dads to support the athlete, and the athlete is part of the team. And we're there to support that. But the paradigm shift's coming on how are we going to look at these athletes, and how are we going to get them all into the discovery phase. And it's through education. It's really about educating moms and dads and athletes and everybody that that we have to do a better job in tending to our athletes. And I still believe it has to start at an early age, because you want them to grow into great habits. You don't want them falling, you don't want them growing into bad habits and trying to break a bad habit. A bad habit is tough to break at times. But if you're at an early age and you learn the good habits early and you learn them, and by the time you're into the high school level, the collegiate level, they've been so ingrained in you, is that when somebody presents a bad habit to you as an athlete, you're going to say, no, this is the way I learned, and this is the way we do it. And so it's going to take a complete change, the thought paradigm change. It's going to take an educational process for all of us, the medical team, the coaches, the parents, everybody to come in together as one. It's going to be seamless. So when we come down to the athlete, it's all about bringing into good habits.
Yeah.
Anything to add?
Yeah. So, again, the structure of the offering would essentially be an assessment, right? Being able to go and hook up to the Tursi V and get your readings, and also combine that with an X-ray just to make sure structurally everything is in place or not in place, and then to have the experts available to take those next steps. But the other side of this is, how do you take the data and the information and translate that to the field? How do you create a bridge between the medical experts and the coaches? So the middle section of this piece, if you look at the medical side and the on-the-field activities, in the middle you've got a coach, and you have a player that needs to understand the why. Okay?
Got it.
And one of the things that we're going to do to help them understand the why and to apply the why quicker is to say, okay, well, if you've got a hip injury, well, these are hip exercises you can do from a physical therapy standpoint, but we're going to take that and translate those directly into, for example, soccer exercises, so the player doesn't feel the difference.
Okay.
Right? Just like in mentioning the shoe, well, the player doesn't recognize that there's even a difference and there's no orthotic because it's integrated into the shoe. we want to integrate the physical therapy needs into the training, so the player just thinks they're having soccer practice.
Wow.
And then just to touch on what Jim was talking about from a language standpoint, making sure that the appropriate language is given to the coaches so that players don't have misalignments in terms of definition, so they don't associate. I'll just give an example. Jim and I were discussing it earlier. A workout. When you imagine a workout, you think old school style. You think, well, we're going to work till exhaustion, and if you can walk after your workout, you haven't worked out.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we take workout and we change that word to practice. It just gives you an entirely different context, an entirely different approach. So what we want to do, again, is from an educational standpoint, we want to give the data, we want to provide the bridge through which that data can be interpreted and understood and then applied to the field, and then we want to give the language to help the coach better communicate to the player.
Unbelievable. So you got, collectively, it is a all-in-one package of how to make a better, smarter athlete, and everyone surrounding them more informed, and that's just, it seems, from my perspective, something that should have been done a long time ago, but now with the technology and everything you have at your disposal, along with all of your expertise, something that would benefit every athlete at every age playing every sport, particularly those young athletes who haven't developed all those, bad qualities and techniques and things like that. So
Parents really need to understand the risks associated with playing youth sports. And there are risks, but you can manage them, right?
Yep.
Again, having a player that's got a hip issue that's not detected, and then let's say they're a sensational soccer player, basketball player, or hockey player, and they get to that point where it's time to go to college and they have a major injury that could have been detected a long time ago. This becomes a problem. You lose out on scholarship money, potentially, you never know. Sky could have been the limit. I have one player that just, he was a former player of mine, and he just missed out on a few opportunities to play at Division I schools, a high-level Division I school, because of a back injury, and this back injury is a recurring one that hasn't been addressed and hadn't been addressed.
And could have possibly been prevented.
100%.
And that's what this program will do, essentially. Wow. All right, well, guys, I appreciate you sitting here and talking with me. I think this is something that every parent, every coach, every trainer, every athlete should hear. And that's what this podcast will hopefully do. So appreciate all three of you. And I think that's a wrap for podcast 1.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.